Hello, my name is Razia Iqbal. Welcome to Notes on a Native Son, a podcast about the writer James Baldwin. This year, 2024, marks the 100th birth anniversary of a man unique in American letters. He was many things to many different people: novelist, essayist, activist, icon, seer. For Baldwin, though such lists were meaningless, who and what James Baldwin was and what is his legacy can't truly be listed, but it can and perhaps should be found in his work. He himself refused any attempt to box him in.
I was called all kinds of names. I had all kinds of labels on me before I was 19 years old. Well, you have to tell the world, I'm not your label. You know, the label belongs to you. It doesn't belong to me. And I have nobody to answer to. I had to defeat the world's intentions. And the only way I could do that was to make it very clear that I am not at all what I seem to be to you. I know what you're seeing, but I'm not that person. And I will make you know it, that I'm not that person. And I make you know that I'm Jimmy Baldwin.
This podcast tries to get close to the idea of getting to know Jimmy Baldwin through his work, and for those who love his words, to return to them. We've called it Notes on a Native Son after one of Baldwin's most famous autobiographical essays, Notes of a Native Son. That essay powerfully clarifies what he is and what America is on James Baldwin's terms. In each episode of Notes on a Native Son, we invite a well-known figure to choose a special or significant James Baldwin passage. The conversation that ensues tells us as much about Baldwin's story as it does about the person who loves Jimmy, as he was known to all who loved him. Our guest on this episode of Notes on a Native Son is the African-American writer and poet Nikki Giovanni. She describes herself as a dreamer. As a young woman, she could see that no one was interested in a black girl writing what was seen as militant poetry. So she formed a company and published it herself. Her second book was launched at the famous New York jazz venue Birdland. She was making a name for herself. When she was 28, she flew to London to sit with James Baldwin and record a conversation hosted by the PBS television series Soul. Baldwin was 46 and an established figure. As event television, it was electric, and clips from that interview continue to be shared many decades later. For many young people, that interview is how they encounter Nikki Giovanni, though she has been a writer and activist for many decades. She's now 81 years old, and she says old age is fun. She recommends it. She's had a garlanded career, nominated for a Grammy, written best-selling books, and she is a distinguished university professor at Virginia Tech. In her own words, she is a cook, a traveler, a dreamer, a writer, and happy. We sat to talk in front of a screen, me in New York and she in Virginia.
My name is Nikki Giovanni. The James Baldwin quote that I have chosen is, "I am not your Negro."
Nikki Giovanni, thank you so much for agreeing to be part of this podcast. Tell us why you've chosen "I am not your Negro."
I love that quote, I always have, because the other side of it is, therefore, you are not my white man. So we both have to change. And I like the way that Jimmy kind of always seemed to balance things out. He would say one thing, but then if you took it to the next step, you would say, oh, now I see where that's coming from. You have to change also, which is exactly what that quote takes us to.
Can you remember where he said it? Because the sentiment that you are describing is something that he said very often in different ways.
I think I must have read it in one of the essays. I mean, it is an old expression. I mean, it wasn't something that he said and then died the next day. I've often said, quoting Jimmy in another way, you know, I, like any other Black American, have often wondered what kind of slave would I be? But the other half of that is, but what kind of master would you be? And we've often asked what kind of slaves would Black people be and what would they do? And people, oh, I would run away or I would do this. Well, what kind of master would you be? And I think white people don't ask themselves that much, what kind of master would they be? And we are now, of course, looking at a situation in America. Actually, it's spreading with the Israeli-Palestinian war. It's not a war against Hamas. It's a war against the Palestinians. And we are now seeing that people are saying, well, what kind of Israeli would you be? Well, what kind of Palestinian would you be? So it's the same question. Jimmy's question is, 50 years old, 60 years old? But it's the same question and is requiring, I think, the same kind of soul searching.
I wonder also whether some of what informed him saying, I'm not your Negro, is this idea that the Negro is the creation of the white world, and that in some ways what James Baldwin was arguing was that the white world needed the Negro in order to do what they needed to do, whether it was to build an entire economic system of slavery or whether it was a desire to be superior, feel superior. So in a way, what he was saying also, it seems to me, was consider why you need to call me the N-word. It wouldn't always be Negro. It would be the more pejorative term.
Yeah, it's just a term that has to be dealt with because people want to tell you what you can call yourself. I don't know that I would disagree. Jimmy and I never discussed it. We didn't have that kind of relation. You know, nobody's going to sit there and have Jimmy Baldwin at dinner and have these philosophical discussions. That's a waste. But no, it really was. But I really love The Godfather. It's one of my favorite movies of all times. I can watch it over and over again. And we realize, of course, that the Italians were not white. When they came to America, the Italians were not white. They were considered other, whatever the other is going to be. We have to remember the Irish were not considered white. And it was the Bostonians and the Protestants who sent the Irish over to Appalachia because they wanted to be rid of them because they were criminal. The British sent them to America to be rid of them, and they sent them to Appalachia. And those that they didn't send to Appalachia, they sent ultimately to Australia, where they really killed as many as they could of the native Australians. So, you know, what does it mean to be white? The whites are constantly trying to define and destroy that which they do not need when the war comes. And if you remember, if you're a Godfather freak, you know that Michael Corleone signed up for the war. You know, Sonny said, you know, nobody should fight in the war. And Michael said, well, I did. I signed up for the war. And they needed the Italians in order to win the war, but they needed another step. In order to win World War I, they needed to put guns in the hands of Black people. And as I say, we are seeing now in 2024, as you and I are speaking, we are seeing a resistance to what clearly is the pro-Palestinian, which is not anti-anything. The pro-Palestinian movement is exactly what they say it is. It's pro-Palestine. And that's not hard to understand. And so now there are those who would say, well, the pro-Palestinian is anti-Israeli. I don't think any thinking person can say that. We can say that 34,000 dead Palestinians is unacceptable, and that to be against that does not mean that you do not have Jewish friends. It just means that that's unacceptable.
It's so interesting hearing you evoke what is currently taking place, because of course so many people are also thinking about that very last time when there were masses of students protesting against a war, which of course was the late 1960s, 1968, and being anti the Vietnam War. I want to ask you about that, and I think we may get back to it, but I wonder whether I can just take you back to just that little thing that you said about, you know, when one has Jimmy Baldwin over for dinner, you know, one doesn't speak about these philosophical things. It would be a waste. Tell me when you first met James Baldwin.
I met him because we had a mutual friend, though I didn't know we had a mutual friend, Ellis Hazler. And I had done favors for Ellis through a program called Soul. And I helped Ellis to produce those shows. But I didn't want to work for Ellis. I didn't want to work for anybody at that point because I'm a poet, I'm a writer, and I didn't have any responsibilities that required me to have a job, thank the Lord. And so I worked with him, but not for him, which meant that I could say and do what I wanted to do. It was a PBS show. At the end of the season, I had worked very hard. We had a very good show. We got very good rating. And so he said, well, what can I do to not to pay you, but to, show that I appreciate it. And I said, gosh, I would really love to talk to James Baldwin. And he said, oh, I know Jimmy. And he said, yeah. He said, I'll call him and see what he says. And I said, that would be just great. And he did. And a couple of days later, he got back to me and he said, well, Jimmy said he'd love to talk to you. He lived in France, as you know, St. Paul de Vence. But he said he didn't have time to come to America. And he wondered if you would be willing to come to London. And I said, I'd walk to London to talk to James Baldwin. Of course I'd be willing. And that's how we met. I met him in London. And we are, actually, I think we're exactly 19 years apart. It was, we're two generations. So it was a lot of fun in many respects. You're talking to, I don't know if it's your father or your big brother, but our conversation was just interesting. Of course, I was nervous because he's James Baldwin and I'm not. And I wanted to hold my generation's end up, and I wanted to hold the woman's end up. And so I wanted to be, intelligent. I think I held my own on that, but, you're talking to somebody really, really great and somebody who's quite brilliant. But I enjoyed it. We filmed, I think, for 2 or 3 days, and they cut it down to like 2 hours, and we made a book out of it. Very nice, though. But that's how I met him.
So that was 1971 when that encounter that resulted in that really quite seminal interview that you did with him. And it's interesting that you talk about the age difference between you, because you carry yourself in that interview with such poise and confidence. Where did that come from in the presence of, as you yourself acknowledge, this great man?
I think you have to do your job. And you just want to be polite and you want to be who you are. And I had a wonderful grandmother. And of course I had manners. And so my job was to hold up my generation. I think I did okay. I think I did my job.
Did you have a plan? Did you have a strategy of how you were going to engage with him? What kinds of things you were going to ask him and how you wanted that to be projected?
No. I really, both of us, unfortunately, smoked. And you will see that. And I regret that. If I could take any one thing, I don't want kids to see that and say, oh, I should smoke, because smoking is terrible. And you end up with lung cancer, which I have. But no, I went in to sit down and not make a fool of myself. And I wouldn't have minded making a fool of myself. But I didn't, I'm not an interviewer. And he's James Baldwin. I've read him. I was delighted that he had read me, that he had read some of my children's poetry. There's a photo of Baldwin at his home in St. Paul de Vence with a book that I wrote called Spin a Soft Black Song. And there's a photo of that book, and you can see it. And I was very, very pleased about that. But other than that, I just wanted to sit down like I'm talking to you. I don't know, maybe you have questions, but I don't. I sat down to try to see what little bit of Jimmy I could bring out that I know and what I think about where we are today. Am I making sense? But I'm just a poet, so I don't approach things like that. I want to know how they feel and can I get through them without being without being foolish.
We'll take a short break. More from Nikki Giovanni when we come back. This is Notes on a Native Son with me, Razia Iqbal. You're listening to Notes on a Native Son with Razia Iqbal. I'm intrigued to hear about what place you think James Baldwin occupied at that time and what place you think he occupies today. How much did his writing mean to you when you were at the heart of what was a revolutionary time?
Well, first, Jimmy was very honest, and I think that was important. And we all read, of course, you read Richard Wright, and you read Ralph Ellison, And all of these were kind of wonderful. But, Jimmy took on at last, poor Richard. Jimmy finally took on, right, to say, why are you talking to these people? Why aren't you talking to Black people? And I think he took that step. And my generation, of course, definitely took that step. We definitely addressed our community more so than trying to please a community that actually showed no interest in us. And at that particular point, and I say us, I mean young Black Americans. And then, of course, and it was a little later, but Motown came along. And Motown, Berry Gordy had his faults. I didn't know Mr. Gordy's not a friend, none of that. But he was the voice of young America. And that was one of the most clever things that ever happened, because everybody sings our song. And so, again, I would bet you if Berry Gordy reads, and who knows, or read, but I would bet you that, again, James Baldwin had an influence on, we're going to sing our own songs. We're going to do what we want to do, and we're not going to be, controlled, or we're not trying to please anybody but ourselves. And of course, the man central to all of that, whom I did not know, unfortunately, was Langston Hughes. And Langston, with his poems, is the one who said to everybody, our time is now, and we don't care. And I think that Langston must have had, and I'm sure did have, an incredible influence on Baldwin, because it was Langston that just said, what's important here is that we will describe our own Black selves. And so my generation came up, those were our mothers and aunts. And Jimmy and them were a little bit ahead of us. So we're right there saying, well, we can do this. We have no particular interest in pleasing other people. And I think that Langston was probably the key influence in all of that, was Langston just kind of hippie-hoppied along. I'm so sorry I didn't know Mr. Hughes. He just, I don't think he was as happy as he appeared to be, but he really just, he's always going to bring that joy.
That phrase that you alluded to, referring to Langston Hughes, that the time is now, is something that James Baldwin says in one of his essays. I think "Stranger in the Village." He refers to the time is now. I wonder also about the presence of women in that moment when Jimmy was around. I mean, you were, as you say, 19 years younger than him, but you were referred to as the poet of the Black Revolution. How much did it feel to you at the time that men dominated and that the voices of women had to be fought for in that moment in the 1960s and 70s?
I didn't then, and I don't now. I say that to the youngsters: do what you have to do and not worry about who you're trying to influence or who wants to hear what you have to say. Somebody does. And so your job is to go out and find it. Of course, one of the things that you and I have just not said, and I thought we should say it to get that balance. Langston was the poet of joy, and Jimmy was the essayist of anger. And so being, as my generation was, 20 years behind all of those people, we got to see how it's going to work for us. And I think some women spent too much time worrying about, the men get all of the credit or the men do this. You just go and do what you want to do or what you have to do. And you can't worry about it. I'm sure that Alice Walker did not say, well, I should write a novel so that I can get some credit as a woman. I think she wrote The Color Purple because that's what she wanted to write, no matter what her gender. And it was none of our business. What she did was what she thought she had to do. But I think that some of the women, some of the time, spent too much time worried about their position with some of the men. But I have more of Jimmy's anger than Hughes's joy. But I didn't like the way that some of the so-called men responded to the brilliance of Toni Morrison. If you can't recognize that Toni Morrison is brilliant, that's your problem. And Toni was a good friend, and I do even now, even yet, miss her. But Toni knew, I'm not going to be bothered with these people. I'm going to go ahead and do what I have to do. What they do and don't like is somebody else's business. And I think that you have to you have to do your life.
We can hear your dog in the background.
Yeah. I'm sorry about that. There's nothing I can do about her.
No, don't worry, don't worry.
Her name is Cleopatra, and somebody must be walking down the street. She's a Yorkie, so she's a very protective dog. I don't know what's going on with her.
I'm interested in hearing you say that you have more of Jimmy's anger than you do of Langston Hughes's joy. What are you angry about still?
The world, people are fools. I have a friend that says you can't keep saying that. People are, you'll depress people. But people are fools. I mean, we talk now about what is called AI, artificial intelligence. And if this is human intelligence, there's been a great mistake. Artificial intelligence is way better because we're still fighting wars. There's nothing dumber than killing something you don't eat. There's just nothing dumber on earth than killing something you don't eat. Why would you do that? If you don't eat it, then why are you killing it? So if we put AI into history right now, it would say, don't fight a war because there's no win. Nobody can win a war. All you can do is keep killing and killing and killing until somebody gets tired of being dead. That's AI. So AI has a little more intelligence than HI, right? Than human intelligence.
Do you go back and read James Baldwin? I mean, he obviously was a really significant figure for you. You read him when you were young. I wonder how much you reread him and go back to him.
I haven't reread him in a while. You go forward. I'm reading mostly right now the youngsters. I had the pleasure of teaching Kwame Alexander, who's a YA writer. But I think that also one of the most brilliant writers right now, writing, period, is a young Haitian lady named Edwidge Dadikin. And Edwidge, I'm not quite 20 years older than Edwidge, but The Dew Breakers is just an incredibly brilliant book. But Edwidge is an incredibly brilliant writer. I haven't reread Jimmy, and I keep saying I should because it's the 100th anniversary, and you should go back. But I'm not a critic. Critics go back and they do things over and over and over again, and I do what I remember. And what I remember, it's like when I was asked, "What's your favorite quote?" The favorite quote is, and I believe that I am not your Negro. I'm still not your Negro. I will never be your Negro. And so it's one of my very favorite quotes of Jimmy. I'm just not your Negro. And you go forward with that. If I were a critic as opposed to a poet, I don't know, I think of myself almost as a futurist now. I would probably look at Jimmy in a different way. His essays are still, he could have written almost any one of those essays for today and looking at the world situation. But we can't just always look at it as if we knew what had happened. We have to look at it like, where do we want to go? Am I making sense? Where do we want to go from here?
But you are making complete sense, and I'm so interested in this idea that he could have written any of those essays in 2024, because that suggests that not only were his messages universal, the progress that we've made was very, very limited.
I don't know if we can call what we're doing now progress or not. I mean, what we've done is that some white people, when they need something, I've been working, by the way, with Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. I don't know if I wrote a short story from a dear friend. I love him so much, Ashley Bryan. I don't know if you know Ashley. He's a children's illustrator. Ashley passed. He was 99 years old. He passed 2 years ago now. And I wrote the story for him because he and I are always talking about children. And the thing that bothered me about Rudolph, the thing that bothers me, and I don't know that it'll ever be published. I'll die and somebody will discover it. But nobody cared. Santa didn't care about Rudolph until one foggy Christmas Eve. And all of a sudden, he needed something. Now, Rudolph had a shiny nose. They laughed at him. Everybody saw that. Santa and Mrs. Claus saw what was happening. That song, that story teaches kids to be bullies until you need something. America had no use for Black people until they wanted to win a gold medal. We had runners. And when America couldn't find any white boy to run, they went and found a couple of Black boys. So you get tired of being called on because you're being needed. It's time that people stop that foolishness. And Rudolph is a perfect example. If I had been Rudolph, I would have told Santa to kiss my ass. Because after all of the pain, I would have, that Rudolph went through. He knew Rudolph was lonely and by himself. Nobody went out there and said, Rudolph, these people are fools. But nobody said that to Jesus either, did they? Nobody said that to Socrates, did they? And nobody said that really to James Baldwin. Nobody says that to any brilliant writer. And I can say that. I said that to kids. I gave a speech to a high school class, about 6-7 months ago. And the first thing I said was, if you are smart, let alone, God bless you, if you are brilliant, you're lonely. So anybody out here who is lonely, you are smart. The rest of these people are fools because you see what they are. They're nothing. They're stupid and they're mean and they're never going to come to say anything to you until they need you. And you need to learn to turn away from them. I always get a big hand on that because it's true. It's quite true. The better you are, the more lonely you will be. So you go on and lead your life because somebody else out there is lonely. And your job is to leave your life open enough to find the other lonely people.
Nikki Giovanni, thank you so much for sharing your memories of James Baldwin and for speaking with us on this podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Nikki Giovanni speaking to me, Razia Iqbal. This has been Notes on a Native Son, a new podcast about James Baldwin. In the next episode, we'll hear from the Libyan writer Hisham Mata. This podcast is brought to you by WNYC Studios and sponsored by the School of Public and International Affairs, Princeton University. It is a sea salt and mango production produced by Tony Phillips. The researcher is Navani Rachumalu. The executive producer for WNYC Studios, Lindsay Foster-Thomas. Original music is by Gary Washington. The sound designer and engineer is Axel Kakoutié. And we give special thanks to Dean Amani Jamal of Princeton University.